everyone, today I have my hands on the new Sony ZV-E10 II and we're going to be doing a hands-on test with this camera for photo and mostly video today. I also have the new kit lens, the 16 to 50mm, which we'll be testing and talking about in today's video too, so let's get started. Today we're going to take a look at lots of example footage from this camera, but also to see if it's worth the price because there are some interesting things to consider. So let's get into it. Today we're in Sydney CBD. I thought I'd do something different. I'm going to be a tourist in my own city testing out this camera. And we're heading towards Circular Quay right now. The Sony ZV-E10 II is a 26 megapixel back illuminated APS-C camera body, and we're going to get straight into testing. This camera makes use of 759 points in stills and 495 points in video of phase detection AF with human, animal, and bird AF modes. For these tests, I'm using both the 16 to 50mm OSS II and 16 to 55mm f2.8 G lenses. These are the only two lenses I will be using throughout the entire video. In the past, I would have used my GM primes to test out a camera like this, but I thought it would be more realistic to stick to these two lenses. I'm using a wide focus area with human AF on to let the camera and lens do all the work and we can see its performance. I found the AF to be in line with Sony's usual high standard of autofocus. The only time I struggled with AF was in very low light situations, which you'll see towards the end of the video. Aside from that, it was super easy to use and rely on during my time with this camera. Well, I did choose to film today because it was meant to be rainy, but now the sun's out. It's like perfectly blue skies. I wanted moody Sydney, not sunny Sydney. The weather never plays ball. Since this is part of the ZV line and now only has an electronic shutter, I see this as a video-centric camera body with the added capability of capturing stills. You'll know the video footage is from the ZV-E10 II when it has a label in the top left-hand corner of the frame rate and picture profile I'm using. The biggest upgrade to video from the Mark I is the ZV-E10 II films in 422 10-bit up to 4K 60p with a minor 1.1 times crop and 30p with no crop. When you film in 60p, you can use it to create smooth, slow-mo footage like this. It is excellent that Sony have included H.265. So hard to see when the sun comes out. The ZV-E10 II includes S-Log3, which I used quite a lot to film with, as well as S-Cinetone, which is like a middle ground between standard picture profile and S-Log3 without having to grade it back to Rec. 709. I am using my own conversion LUT for the log footage.
And it's raining.
Yay, finally. I could see the dark clouds looming in the distance. I'm like, I really want just moody Sydney.
The camera's not weatherproof.
Well, you know, it's really small. It fits under my hand. Oh yeah, this looks so cool. But I need shelter. The footage coming out of this camera is really beautiful. It's at the same high quality standard as most other modern Sony cameras. This upgraded file format along with the new sensor are one of the reasons why this footage looks so good. We have great colors all around, nice skin tones, good dynamic range, and the footage is easy to work with when it comes to color grading. I also appreciate how much detail and sharpness you can see in the video files. The ZV doesn't have mechanical stabilization. Instead of IBIS, it relies on the electronic stabilization of the lens, also known as normal steady shot, or it uses active steady shot in the camera, which induces a significant crop on the footage. A downside to this is when I put my 16 to 55mm f2.8 G lens on the camera, normal steady shot is grayed out since the lens has no inbuilt stabilization. I have no choice but to either have stabilization switched off, causing very shaky looking footage like this, or to film with a large crop because I need to turn on active stabilization. With this on, aside from the crop it causes, I think it does a really good job at keeping the footage looking nice and smooth. With OSS, also known as standard stabilization, the footage honestly looks too shaky for my liking, especially when I'm walking around vlogging. Since this is a camera aimed at content creators and not necessarily photo and video professionals, it does include a few automatic modes and buttons to achieve certain looks with ease and no camera knowledge required. I do really like the added touch of the UI flipping to be in horizontal and vertical depending how you're filming. So that's cool. Something I'm surprised about is even though this camera is getting marketed towards content creators who would use this feature, it does not include Sony's auto framing for video, which cameras like the ZV-E1 and A6700 do have. I feel like any new ZV camera should have this since the ZV line is for people creating content by themselves. They would usually have the camera on a tripod and can use this to create more dynamic looking shots. Also, as much as I like the vertical UI changing, something I would really like to see from Sony are features that make having to create content in both vertical and horizontal format easier, such as OpenGate. Maybe the a7S IV would be a great camera for them to introduce this with. Let's take a look at photography with this camera. While an electronic shutter will be fine to use in a lot of photography situations, it does have its limitations over a mechanical shutter, which the ZV-E10 I had. For example, when taking photos of a high-speed subject like a car, you can start to see some rolling shutter where straight lines appear bendy. Another spot where you'll feel the limitations of an electronic shutter is in low light. Depending on the shutter speed you're using, you might start to see this banding with artificial lighting. Luckily, this camera does have variable shutter mode to fine-tune your shutter to minimize this effect, but it is something to keep in mind if you plan on shooting a lot in these kinds of lighting conditions. But anyway, as you can see from my on-location examples, this camera really does take a great photo, and you are getting the same high-quality results you would get out of the a6700, which is Sony's flagship APS-C photography camera. These are the photos I took with the higher-end 16 to 55mm f2.8G. The images are super clear and sharp. Since we don't have IBIS in this camera or lens, I did have to bump up my ISO a bit to make sure I had a fast enough shutter to not get motion blur in my images. Alongside this new camera, Sony are also releasing a new lens, this PZ 16 to 50mm f3.5 to 5.6 OSS II. So I have a couple more photos and lots of video to share with that. I've got the Opera House right here in the background, and I want to show you the focal range you can get with this lens. So I'm going to start off with a wide shot at 16mm. Then I'll zoom into about 24mm. Next I'll do 35 and finally 50. I really quite like this lens. It is surprisingly sharp considering it's a kit lens. I love all the detail you can see in the images I captured, and it looks great for portraits too. By the way, thank you Dan for modeling for us. The focal range is really convenient to use for a wide variety of photography styles, from landscape to portraits to street to cityscapes, since this is a full frame equivalent focal length of 24 to 75mm. A bonus of using this lens is that it has OSS, so you can use slower shutter speeds if needed to capture a stable image. This will come in handy since you have an aperture range of f3.5 to 5.6 in this lens, meaning you need a lot of light. I was able to use a base ISO of 100 during the bright sunny photos of the Opera House, but as soon as we were with the buildings, I was using a much higher ISO range to properly expose my images. So there's 3 different ways that you can zoom with this lens on this camera. First is if you use the ring on the lens, and this is going to give you a super fast zoom, so you can go as fast as you want with this one. The next one is using the switch on the side of the lens, and this is going to give you a really slow, smooth zoom. That's really hard to say. So if you use that, and you can also use this little switch at the front here because this is a PZ lens, so you can zoom in and out with this. Slow, smooth zoom, slow, smooth zoom, slow, smooth zoom. The ZV-E10 II weighs 377 grams. It really does feel light when you're out and about filming with it and using it for vlogging. It has a comfortable little hand grip, which is great to see on a small body like this. The LCD flips out, which is pretty standard. It has a single UHS 2 SD card slot, headphone jack, 3.5mm mic jack, micro HDMI, and USB-C port. The on and off switch also has a zoom function for when you're using PZ lenses on this camera, and features all the same buttons as the Mark I, aside from the stills, video, and SNQ mode, which is now the same switch you can find on the ZV-E1. It does not have an inbuilt flash, which is very popular for photography with content creators recently, but it does have a multi-interface hot shoe. The ZV-E10 Mark I weighs 343 grams, and I believe this Mark II is about 30 grams heavier, even though they removed the mechanical shutter due to the updated battery. Now it uses FZ batteries, which is a welcome upgrade for me, as these batteries last longer than the W batteries the Mark I uses. That means you get to carry less batteries around. Yay! Let's take a look at some camera comparisons. If you're after a lightweight, compact, hybrid camera, you are not strapped for options with Sony. But that leads to the question of which camera is right for you and which one is worth getting. I'm going to briefly take a look at some of the key features of similar cameras. Starting on the cheapest end at $1,000, you have the ZV-E10 II, which is a fixed lens point and shoot style camera and films up to 4K 30p. These are all in Australian dollars. With the original ZV-E10 at the same price of $1,000, hand, you have an APS-C body with a mechanical shutter, interchangeable lens mount, and films up to 4K 30p. Next, we have this ZV-E10 II at $1,849. This is an APS-C body with an electronic shutter, interchangeable lens mount, but now with the ability to film up to 4K 60p. For around the same price of $1,900, you also have the option of Sony's flagship APS-C camera, the a6700. So let's take a closer look at this comparison. At the same price point, the a6700 offers some tempting upgrades, including a mechanical shutter, 5 stops of IBIS, 120 fps viewfinder, weather sealing, auto framing, the same autofocus capabilities as the flagship full-frame A7R5 with human, animal, bird, insect, car, train, and airplane AF modes compared to the ZV-E10 II, which has human, animal, and bird. And finally, the ability to film in up to 4K 120p. Where the ZV-E10 II wins in this comparison will have to be in weight. It's 377 grams compared to 493 grams, plus the a6700 is a little bit larger in size. Jumping up in price and also into full-frame sensors, at $2,700 you have the A7C II and the ZV-E1. The ZV-E1 is a video-centric camera with a 12 megapixel sensor, electronic shutter only, and films up to 4K 60p full frame. The A7C II is a hybrid 33 megapixel camera with a mechanical shutter and is basically a mini and slightly stripped down version of the professional A7 IV. Not to mention, we also have the FX30, which is again a video-centric APS-C camera body if you're looking to get into video professionally. So, as you can see, there are a lot of options when it comes to smaller vlogging cameras out there. I think the a6700 is the most notable camera body to be considering if you are thinking of getting this ZV-E10 II. It is officially blue hour, so I'm gonna get some low light shots as well. I'm at ISO 6400 and a shutter of 1/100. Dan's on the same ISO as me. And yeah, and then we'll do an ISO test where I'll show you every single ISO. To be fair, I am comparing the price of the ZV on release versus the a6700 price, which has already been out for a year. But right now, you can get so much more value out of the a6700 at the same price point. While the 4K 60p new battery and sensor upgrades are very welcome in the ZV-E10 II, something I'm struggling with is why there are some missing features. I think this would be a fantastic camera at this price point if it also had one of either improved stabilization, a mechanical shutter, or auto framing. With the mechanical shutter removed, it would have been great to see IBIS added into this camera. Let me know what you think in the comments. In time, as the price drops, I think it'll be much easier to recommend this camera with the feature set it has. So let's do a vlogging test on the ZV-E10 Mark II. So I'm using the kit lens with this, which has OSS, and I'm currently jumping over puddles. But the kit lens itself has OSS and I have standard stabilization, and I'm just gonna walk around a little bit and talk to camera so you can get a feel for what the footage looks like. So I'm currently filming in 4K 25p and I'm filming in S-Log as well. I've got the camera on a little Joby tripod too, so I can hold it out a little bit further away. This is what it looks like at 16 millimeters, which honestly is actually pretty good. This is what it looks like with my hand completely outstretched, and this is what it looks like if I bend it a little bit to kind of rest it closer to my body to keep the footage looking a bit more stable. And this being a 16 millimeter on APS-C, this is a 24 millimeter full frame equivalent. Now I've switched on active steady shot and I'm still at 16 millimeters. That's with my arm outstretched. So we have a pretty significant crop. It's a little bit, yeah, if you've got your arm outstretched, you can see a bit of the background, but if you bring it a bit closer to your body, my face kind of fills the majority of the frame. But the footage is quite a lot more stable. I'm walking just at the same pace and in the same steps that I was in the last clip, so we can compare them side by side. And it's time for a microphone test. So first up, we've got the lav mic, which you've been listening to this entire time. So I'm gonna switch over now to the external microphone that I've got attached to the camera, and I'm gonna talk a little bit before we switch over to the next internal microphone. Now I've switched over to the internal microphone of the ZV-E10 II, and I have the microphone direction set to front because I'm talking to the camera, and I also have wind noise reduction switched to off. It is a little bit breezy, and the traffic noise behind me, there's like some traffic in the distance, is pretty loud today. So we'll see what my voice sounds like as I'm talking. We'll see if you can hear any of those external sounds coming through as well. And yeah, now we're going to switch over to the next one. So now for this test, I still have the microphone direction set to front, but I have wind noise reduction set to on instead. So again, I'll talk a little bit so you can get an idea of what that sounds like. I also don't have the windshield for the microphone, so the microphone of the camera is just out in the open so we can see what that sounds like. The last one I want to test out is wind noise reduction is back to off, and this time I have the microphone direction set to all directions. So this is a really good setting to have if you like talking to the camera, but then you flip the camera to film something else and you continue talking, or
if the person behind the camera has a story to tell.
There we go. That is all I have for today's review on this camera. Let me know what you think of the camera and of the footage down in the comments below, because I really love hearing from you. But that is all I have for today's video. I really hope you enjoyed watching and you learned something new. As always, I make new videos every single week, so I'll see you all next time. Bye.